Despite the fact that Jesus Christ was captured and crucified by the Romans, the Pharisees contributed to his capture and execution. They harshly criticized his teachings and followers, and their polemics are given a special place in the New Testament. Who were the Pharisees and why were they so intolerant of Jesus and his teachings? We get basic information about them from the New Testament and from the works of the Jewish historian Josephus Flavius, who is believed to have been a Pharisee himself. At the time of Christ, there were three religious parties or movements in Judea: the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. The Sadducees were the smallest movement. At the same time, they occupied the most prestigious social position. They belonged to the priestly aristocracy. The name Sadducees apparently goes back to the name of Zadok, the high priest under King Solomon. The Sadducees administered the most brutal justice. The supreme body of legal authority at that time was the Sanhedrin. The high priests Anna and Caiaphas, who headed it, pronounced a guilty verdict on Christ. And it was the high priests who persuaded Judas to hand over the teacher to the Romans. The main ideological and political opponents of the Sadducees were the Pharisees. There were constant disagreements and conflicts between these two schools on theological issues. In particular, the Pharisees were against Hellenization, which the Sadducees supported, and they sharply condemned the Roman power in Judea. The name Pharisees can be roughly translated as separated. This means from sin, filth, and vice. The Pharisees advocated the strictest observance of religious commandments and sharply condemned dissent. They were very educated and well-read people. The Pharisees tried to systematize the prescriptions of the Old Testament and bring them to a clear form. But sometimes in their spiritual zeal they went too far. What this led to, we will see later. Finally, there were the Essenes. If the Pharisees and Sadducees had their disagreements, then the Essenes preferred to completely break off relations with the temple. Moreover, some of them, the most radical, even broke with secular life in principle and began to establish their own communities. This is the situation observed in Judea in the 1st century AD. When Jesus Christ began to preach and gather followers around him, his relations with the Pharisees became tense. Moreover, this began even before the clashes with Christ. Even when John the Baptist began to baptize people in the Jordan, the Pharisees came out with sharp criticism against him. They asked by what right he did this, not being the Messiah. But here's what's interesting. Jesus shared many of the positions of the Pharisaic teaching, for example, about the resurrection of the dead, about spirits and angels. In his sermons, he noted that it is necessary to follow the prescriptions taught by the Pharisees. The scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, therefore whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do. At the same time, he condemned the Pharisees themselves. And the reason for his criticism was that they did not follow the law they taught and were mired in sin. But do not do as they do, for they say and do not. Of course, the Pharisees could not like this. They were confident in their own righteousness and morality. And suddenly someone from outside appeared and threw accusations of hypocrisy and vanity in their faces. For example, one of the reasons for the clashes was the Pharisees' love of wealth. They considered it God's mercy, a reward for righteous deeds. But, as we know, Jesus sharply condemned the love of money. Instead of accumulating wealth, he taught that one must do good deeds and help one's neighbor. There were other reasons for conflicts. For example, the Pharisees accused Christ of healing people on Saturday. This day of the week is considered sacred, and no work can be done on Saturday. The Pharisees strictly followed this rule. Jesus' healing of the sick was perceived by them as work, that is, a violation of the Sabbath. The fact that he was doing good in doing so did not matter. He violated it, and that was it. Another time, Jesus' disciples picked ears of corn in a field on Saturday and ate them. This was also regarded as work, harvesting. The incident became another reason for attacks. Why did Jesus go to such provocations? For him, this was an opportunity to turn the accusations of his opponents against them, to show that vice was hidden behind ostentatious piety. Once, the Pharisees even wanted to kill Christ by stoning him. But he continued to expose their sins, accusing them of hypocrisy and greed. So the Pharisees' and Sadducees' dislike of Jesus Christ was mutual. There were exceptions. For example, the Pharisee Nicodemus supported his teaching and spoke out in his defense. The word Pharisee is used even today. It has become a synonym for religious hypocrisy and complacency.